Hello, folks. Now, before we get to the trivial detail of talking about CSS and how to build better software in the age of, well, all kinds of things we're going to talk about, this is on Friday night, and it's Pubconf, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So any of you folks who were here last year who saw me and the Line Breakers, that was some of our music there. We were on this stage at the attendee party last year. This year, we decided we'd rather play in a sleazy basement where you stick to the floor. So that's going to be on Friday night at the Slaughtered Lamb, and tickets are on sale now at pubconf.io, and you should totally come along. And even if you're supposed to be leaving on Friday, you've made poor decisions, and it's not too late to change your mind and make everything all right. Let's talk about CSS. Cascading Style Sheets, the programming language that everybody loves to hate, the most controversial color in the developer's palette. CSS is, well, some people say, well, CSS is not even a real programming language, is it? And you say, why not? And then they go on to say something like, well, it's not Turing complete. Or they say something like, oh, but you can't use it to write a Y combinator, or you can't write a recursive function. The best way to deal with those kinds of people is to give them some text and very politely say, hey, could you make this 72-point Cambria bold royal blue with a drop shadow? Thanks. You can only use Haskell. At which point they will probably go away. But CSS is controversial. CSS has always been, there's this thing Stack Overflow does every year, the most loved and the most hated and the most admired programming languages, and they don't even list CSS in its own category because they think it wouldn't be fair. It just kind of gets stuck on alongside HTML. But there are valid reasons why, so many projects, so many developers I've worked with, they build the back end, and it's great, and they've got microservices and unit tests and views and controllers, and everything's lovely, and then you're like, oh, you just need to style it, and then they get sad. And there are reasons why CSS makes people sad, and they are valid reasons. First of all, you can't build software with it. CSS, on its own, doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything until you give it some HTML to play with. And this means that if you are, you can't just sit down and be like, yeah, I'm going to learn CSS as my first programming language. No one did that. Well, maybe one person did that, but I wish them well. You have to learn HTML at the same time. And you have to learn HTML and CSS, so you're learning two things simultaneously and trying to keep track of the relationship and the difference between the two. So you can't build software with it, but also you can't avoid it. If you really, really don't like Java, you can build object-oriented software with C# or C++ your entire career. If you don't like Perl, you can use Ruby. If you don't like Ruby, you can use Python. If you don't like Python, you can use Perl. If you absolutely hate Apple and iOS and everything they stand for, you can spend your entire career on Linux and Android and be absolutely fine. But if you want to do anything on the web ever, at some point, you are going to have to get your hands dirty with CSS. Now, that's not to say there aren't projects out there that say you can avoid CSS, because there's projects, there's Tailwind, which is like, oh, you don't need to learn it, you just use our utility classes. Or there's CSS in JS, which is, don't write CSS, write JavaScript, and we'll make it into CSS for you, that try to maintain this abstraction of you can use the language you like instead of this one. But in my experience, sooner or later, the abstractions break down. And at that point, you're going to have to get your hands dirty with it. There is a lot of really bad CSS code out there. Now, in some ways, this is a strength, because all of us human developers who do things the old-fashioned way, language models are not very good at CSS because they have been trained on publicly available data, and a lot of that is not very good. But there's more to it than that. One, I think developers write good code when they're happy and they enjoy the tools they're working with, and we're talking about reasons why CSS makes developers sad. But also, CSS is damn near impossible to test. Now, I'm not going to say absolutely impossible, because you can do something called visual regression testing, which is where every time you build your project, you spin up a headless browser, and you take a screenshot, and you compare that to the exact same screenshot, what it looked like yesterday, and if anything changed, you tell somebody, because it might be a bug, it might be a feature. We don't know. But that's kind of the state of the art. CSS doesn't have output. It doesn't have error messages. There's no way of writing unit testing for it. You can't really isolate elements. Now, there are ways of working with it, but if you're working on a big legacy project or something which has a lot of code going back a lot of years, you've probably had that experience where you fix something, And 2 days later, you get an angry Slack message that the submit button has disappeared from a page that you didn't even know was there. And you go digging, and you're like, yeah, that's being reused. I didn't know that. And it's very difficult to keep track of those. So what a lot of developers end up doing is they're like, well, I'm not going to edit anything because I can't tell where it's being used. I'm just going to copy and paste and make a new one, and copy and paste and make a new one. And so, one, it's really hard to tell. If you want to make a change, how do I do this well? Two, it's difficult to test, has no output, has no error messages. It's full of mistakes. No, I'm serious. The CSS Working Group Wiki has a page called Incomplete List of Mistakes in the Design of CSS, which has this little thing at the top. These should be corrected if anyone invents a time machine. There's just a bunch of stuff that they had to ship something, and they shipped it, and it's not that they screwed it up on purpose. They made the best decisions available with the information at the time, put it on the web, and then a year or two later, they went, yeah, that really wasn't the right way of doing that. But by then, it's too late. It's out, and it's in the wild, and as we're going to see a couple of times during the talk, once something is out on the web in the wild, if you change it, you're going to break the internet. And the golden rule of evolving all this kind of stuff, don't break the internet. People are using the internet. And it changes all the time. The reason why this talk is called Rethinking CSS, the reason why I think it is time for us to reconsider a lot of attitudes to CSS, is a lot of folks I worked with, they learned it at some point in their career, and they're like, right, that's it, CSS, tick. I've done it. I know it, or I don't know it, or I like it, or I don't like it. And then they just kind of go and they get on, because we got stuff to do, and we've got systems to build, and we've got work to get on with. CSS and HTML are living standards. They are constantly evolving. At any given point in time, there are half a dozen draft specifications which maybe you can turn on using an experimental flag. There's half a dozen things that they work in Firefox today, but they're not going to be in Chrome until next month. Or they're in Chrome now, but they're not going to work in Safari. But eventually, all this stuff rolls out. It rolls out across browsers. There is a thing called the Baseline project that keeps track of what can you actually use across all of the main browser engines. Now, the good news, it used to be like 5 years from something being a proposal to something being usable. Today, we've got that down to months because most browsers just update themselves in the night, because we've learned that asking a user if they want to update their web browser is a dumb question because they never say yes, so we just do it for you, which means the cycle time of updates and stuff is a lot better. And there are some very smart, very talented, people I think have the best interests of the web at heart, working incredibly hard on adding all of these new capabilities to the browser specifications that drive HTML and CSS. And so it probably makes sense to ask, well, where is all this stuff coming from? Why is there this appetite for all the new shiny things? And to answer that, we are going to go back to the very dawn of the web, to Mosaic, NCSA Mosaic, and Viola WWW. This is about 1992, 1993. And there was a post on the WWW Talk mailing list from 1994. Someone pops up, and they're like, hey, as you can see, Mosaic has added in an extra blank line. Am I right in assuming this is, in fact, a bug in the Mosaic rendering and that the link's output is correct? And Mark Andreessen, who created Mosaic and went on to found Netscape, he replies, it's not a bug, it's a rendering choice made by the browser. What can you do about it? Probably nothing. Isn't that cheery news? I think so. In fact, it has been a constant source of delight for me over the past year to continually tell hordes, literally, of people who want to, strap yourselves in, here it comes, control what their documents look like in ways that would be trivial in tech or Microsoft Word or every other common text processing environment. Sorry, you're screwed. Oh well, live and learn, or not. Cheers, Mark. Now, this was not that controversial an idea. The whole point of the web, the people who created it were like, we want to put structured information on the internet that people can consume in whatever format is appropriate for them. Screen readers, big fonts, small fonts, text browsers, visual browsers, graphical browsers. They wanted the users to have control of that experience, which sounds amazing in these days of social media and slop and adverts everywhere. And maybe we can get back a little bit of that. But you also have to remember, this is kind of the early 1990s. If you've ever seen a button on a computer screen, it probably looked like that, because buttons were gray, and that's what they looked like. Any of you folks out there who's still working with .NET WinForms, do you have meetings about what color the button should be? Of course you don't. What a stupid way to spend your afternoon. Microsoft designs the button, you decide where it's going to go and what happens when you click on it, and that's the way it works. Computers looked like this, which meant that if you had a button on a web page somewhere. Now, I was there when a lot of this stuff happened because I have been building websites since my first web page was 1992. And when I first started doing this stuff for a living in the late 90s, the absolute state of the art in avant-garde web design was rounded corners. Because web pages looked like operating systems because they had gray buttons, unless you were on a Mac where the buttons looked like the blue pill from the Matrix. And of course, this made sense for software developers, but companies, prestige brands, they're like, we don't want our website to look like an operating system. We want our website to look like our brochure. We want our website to look like our products or our corporate branding. We've got these ideas. Now, the agency that I worked for in the late 90s, we charged customers per button. We would charge them £10 for each rounded button on their website because Paul had to make them in Photoshop. And then somebody figures out that you can take your image from Photoshop and you can cut the corners and the edges off and you can wrap it in an HTML table and then you can take out the image in the middle and you can just put your own text in there and now you can make free money because we developers could crank out rounded buttons and charge the clients £10 for every one that we did. The free money did not last very long, but clearly this was a big thing. And the whole point, the rounded buttons, the first time you see them, you're like, wow, that's really cool. How did they do that? And then people get into, okay, you do it in Photoshop. Then we invent 9-slice scaling, which is like a regular technique to do it. The browser vendors go, oh, rounded corners. Yeah, actually, that's not a bad idea. Maybe we should support that. And so one of the earliest features that came out in CSS was border radius. Now, this works in Netscape and Safari for about 5 years. Microsoft, no. Microsoft hated rounded corners so much, they built an entire operating system to try to persuade the world that we wanted square buttons and square corners. The Windows Metro UI, Windows 8, Windows Phone, they're like, you don't need rounded corners. Now, I don't know if it was cheaper for them to build Windows Metro than to fix Internet Explorer. I honestly don't know. But I'm guessing at some point they finally went, you know what, let's just support the standard. And of course, today, yeah, rounded corners, who gives a crap? They're just a thing. If you want them, you got them. If you don't want them, you don't have to have them. But no one looks at a website with rounded corners on it and goes, oh, wow, how did they do that? That's really cool. And this is the pattern that has played out over and over again. It starts with, how did they do that? I want my website to look like that website because that website's cool. And then people write some blog posts or some articles or they post code pens, and then you get a plugin or you get a snippet or you get a polyfill, something you can download and add to your site. And then the browser people go, you know what? Yeah, we're on board with this. This is a good idea. And then everyone's like, boring. It's not cool anymore because browsers can do it. What's new and shiny? And round and round and round we go. But I think the biggest kind of reevaluation, the web is fundamentally built on the 3 pillars of structure, presentation, and behavior. And structure on the web is, if you do it properly, it's semantic HTML. If your web page is div, 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 you don't have structure, you have mess. And it's your job to clean it up. Presentation has always been about CSS, and behavior has always been about JavaScript. And so if you look at the kind of elements that make this stuff work, your structure is your paragraphs and your forms and your lists and your headings and your inputs and all these kinds of things. That is the structure of the information that you are presenting, you want people to interact with. How you present it, what color is it? What font? What's the layout? What does it look like on a phone? And then behavior is the things that happen. Interaction, validation, animation, and business logic. If you've got client-side application code running. But what I think has happened in the last decade or so is the wider web community has gone, a lot of the stuff we thought was behavior, it's actually a presentation concern. Like giving animated feedback because somebody made a mistake filling out a form, that's not really the same as calculating their mortgage repayments or booking them an airline ticket. That's a presentation concern, and we probably shouldn't be using JavaScript for that because the less JavaScript in the world, the better. So let's look at an example of something which is still in the process of evolving, but I think is pretty much nearly there. We're going to talk about accordions. Not Weird Al accordions, we're going to talk about accordions. And an accordion is a thing that has some headings, and when you click on one of the headings, what it does opens up, and each heading has a little bit of detail attached to it. And this is the one that is part of Bootstrap. This is Flowbyte, which is a library of plugins for Tailwind. This is the one that ships with the Material UI design kit from Google. Now, these have been around for 10, 15 years now. It's an easy JavaScript, drop it in your website. In HTML, there's a thing called the details element. And details can contain an element called summary. And we can have details, and we can have details, and we can have details. And if you just this, no CSS, you look at this in a browser, this is what you get. And when you click on one of them, it's going to open that. How many of you folks have seen this before? How many of you haven't? Yeah, that's quite a lot of hands. Because obviously this is some new shit, right? They just like snuck this in over Christmas or something. Now, if you go over, so we want mutually exclusive behavior. What we're going to do is we're going to say, well, we're going to give those a name element, just like we do with checkboxes and radio buttons. And now we've got this mutually exclusive, one opens and the other one closes. Now, there's a wonderful website called caniuse.com. And if we go on Can I Use, and we say, hey, can I use details? Is that OK? And it gives you this really comprehensive breakdown. OK, widely available across major browsers. OK, that's good. Since when? Well, Opera since 2013. Firefox since 2016. It's been in Safari since 2012, so 14 years in there. 2020 for Edge, and it's been in Chrome since 2011. So this is not newfangled. This is something that has been in there a long, long while, but a lot of people don't know about it. And also the people who built those accordion controls in JavaScript, they didn't use it. They did it all by putting divs inside divs inside divs. Now, there is a caveat. That mutually exclusive behavior, when you put the name on it, that has only been part of baseline since the end of 2024. It took Firefox and Safari a little while to catch up there. So it's OK now. But this means that at some point in 2024, there was a news story that mutually exclusive details elements now work on Firefox. This is not front page of Hacker News. This is not, stop the press. Unless you are specifically paying attention to this issue, you have no idea the significance of what it was that you just scrolled past. And then it takes another couple of months, maybe a year, for this to actually roll out across devices. And so it's really easy to miss the stuff that's going on here. Now, let's look at what we can do with it. So I've got a slightly more involved HTML example. These are just a bunch of bands and musicians that I've been listening to recently. So we got a discography, we got some photos in there. And I'm going to put in a CSS rule that says, right, if there's a details with a summary in it, find the summary, change the cursor to a pointer, which is not a pointer, it's a pointer, finger pointer, put a border on it, give it a background. You know what color Gainsborough is, right? Everyone knows Gainsborough. There we go. Look at that. Now it's starting to look a little bit shinier. And what we can do now, OK, we got that behavior. Let's stick a margin on the bottom of that. So we're going to drop in details. We'll say margin bottom, put half a rem of padding on that. OK, looking pretty good. Now what I want to do is I want to put a border around the content. Now, that's not an HTML element. You can stick anything you like inside that details tab, but it gives you what is called a pseudo element. So this details, details content, that's a thing. It's not in HTML, but CSS can find it, and it can do stuff to it. So let's put a border color on that and a solid border. Now, the border width there, nothing on the top, but we'll have 2 pixels on the sides and the bottom, half a rem of padding. Well, that's done all of them, which is not what we want. We only want the one that's open, and so we need to combine the pseudo selector with a pseudo class. So details open only applies when it's open, and then content targets the bit that appears when it's open. And so now we have this effect, which is looking pretty good, I think. Now, let's go a little bit further. First of all, CSS has nested syntax now. We don't need to say details and then details summary. Hey, summary belongs to details. Let's stick it inside it. This has worked for a long time if you were using something like a preprocessor, something like Sass or less, that would take your CSS with the shiny bits and turn it into vanilla CSS that browsers can understand. And then browsers went, you know what, we can do that. That doesn't look that difficult. And so we now have nested syntax. The caveat is for that open thing to work, we got to say, well, no, it's a pseudo class that applies to the thing you're talking to. It's not a nested element, so we'll drop an ampersand in there. This is a nicer syntax, because it means everything to do with details is in one block you can collapse in your editor. So, OK, that's looking pretty good. We got a gap here we don't like. Let's fix that. The way we're going to fix that, now, we don't know what the first thing in that's going to be. Could be a list, could be a paragraph, could be a heading, could be an anything. So we're going to drop a rule in that says that the first sibling of the summary should always have no padding on the top, whatever it is. And boom, that's going to fix that. And now we have no padding on the top of that. So to make it look a little shinier, We are going to put a border radius. Now, yeah, it doesn't look great because it's still rounding the summary. So we're going to put a different border radius on the one that's open. And so the one that is open only has rounded top corners, and the panel only has rounded bottom corners. Isn't that much nicer? Let's put a little bit of color styling on there. So the one that's open, we'll give that a royal blue with a navy border. We'll make the border white. That's looking kind of good there. OK, that's nice. Now, those demos that we looked at earlier, the thing about them is they slide. They're smooth. They move, right? And motion is good. Animation is good. So let's look at how we can build animation. Now, there is a lovely thing in modern CSS called transitions. And we're going to do a quick demo. We're going to build a dock. We're going to take a bunch of very relevant and current contemporary application icons, and we are going to build a little simulation of the macOS dock there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a rule in here. We've got anchors with images in them. I'm going to say when we hover over one of those images, I want you to make it 128 pixels wide. And so in comes the mouse pointer. We hover over those, and you see they just snap to the larger size. It's instantaneous. Now, there's another nice trick we can do. One, I want something a little bit more progressive in terms of the layout. It would be nice if the ones either side, they could get a little bit bigger. And styling the one afterwards is easy, because you can say, hey, if I'm hovering over this, find the sibling, which is an A. Styling the one before, now doing anything in CSS that goes backwards has always been a headache, because from day one, it was designed with the idea you might not have finished downloading the web page yet. So everything that you've downloaded, you should be able to style with what you've already seen. We didn't want browsers having to go, oh, crap, hang on, I need to go back and redraw that thing that I just drew. This was a big deal in the 90s. It's not a big deal anymore. Computers are good now. So we can put in a rule that says, well, also, anything that has a sibling that is being hovered over, so if the one next to it, if that's being hovered, let's make those a little bit bigger as well. And we'll put an orange outline on them just so you can clearly see the effect here. So now when we hover over those things, yeah, that's fine. That's nice. Does what we want. And now for the magic, the special sauce. Transition all 0.2 seconds. Anything changes, do it nicely. Do it gradually, 0.2 second animation. We drop that one in, and now without any JavaScript animation, set timeouts and those kinds of things, we've got this visual effect across the dock. It's animating. Now, what every developer, including me, does is we find out about this. We go, transition. Amazing, brilliant. I can use it to build drop-down menus. And so we build a drop-down menu that looks like this, and we go File, and we hover transition, height 0.5 seconds, and then we hover over there, and it goes snap, and it opens immediately. And we're like, oh, but transition was looking so good for the 30 minutes since I discovered it existed, and it's already let me down. And the reason is this thing here. Transition was rolled out in about 2014, 2015, and it did not work with anything that had an automatic size. And automatic sizing is a big deal, because it means the browser just figures out how big to make it all. You don't need to do the calculations yourself. This did not work with transition to auto, is what it's become known as. Now, the headache here is if you go onto the the GitHub issue on the World Wide Web Consortium CSS working group, there is an 8-year GitHub conversation about this particular problem. And of course, the immediate thing, going back to 2016, about a year after the bug was found, is people going, well, just fix it. Just make it, it obviously was supposed to do that, just make it do that. And then David Barron, who's one of the engineers working on the Chromium engine, he eventually crops up, this is 8 years later, and he says, look, I've done the research. This is all the websites that will break if we just fix it. Stack Overflow will stop working. Alibaba Cloud will stop working. Intuit, UPS. There's a big long list of these things. Disney Plus was another one. This is all websites that consciously or unconsciously ended up relying on the broken behavior, and so if we fix the problem, we're going to break the web. Golden rule, don't break the web. And so eventually the CSS working group says, look, we're going to come up with a new keyword, interpolate size. If you want to opt into the behavior that should have been there in the first place, you need to put this into your CSS, and sure enough, it says there, if we had a time machine, this property wouldn't need to exist. So if you just want to opt into the glorious future, all you do is you put a root element in your CSS and say, look, this entire website, we're moving it onto the parallel timeline where this thing never sucked. And it works. And now you get transitions to auto height and auto width and those kinds of things. So we can take that same root interpolate size. We're going to drop that into our accordion demo, allow keywords. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, right, the details content has a height of 0, overflow is hidden, transition, all 0.5 seconds, and then when it's open, set the height to auto. And that kind of works, but there's some weirdness. So one, it opens, but it doesn't close. Well, actually, it does close. It's just by the time it closes, it's already invisible because the browser has already hidden it. So it is animating the height, but it's animating on something that you can't see because it's already been switched off. And that's not a property that can be animated smoothly. The other thing, if you watch that video real close, is you watch the borders. The borders are kind of doing this sort of slightly weird thing, which we don't really like very much. So first of all, let's fix the disappearing element. What we need to do with that is we need to add a transition behavior allow discrete, which says things that just snap from one state to another, like changing a font or something going from visible to hidden. It's not fading out, it's just switching off. Those can participate in the timing for our transitions and animations. So that means this thing is now going to stay on the screen for a couple of seconds, or however long the animation is, and at the end, it will then fade out. So we get this. Still not quite right. What we need to do is we need to animate multiple things independently, because we want to do something different with the border than we've done with the rest of it. Now, the transition, this shorthand syntax, we say height, 1 second, linear, 0.1. What we're actually saying is this is the property, this is the duration, this is the timing function, and this is the delay. So for that one, for the height, I want you to do it smoothly over 1 second using a linear function, so it just starts and stops. There's no kind of soft landing, and I want you to wait 0.1 seconds before you do it. If we declare another one of those, it's going to overwrite that one, because transition property can only occur once on a class, and the last one wins. So if you want multiples, what you've got to do is say, OK, we'll have to have transition property height, 1 second, linear, OK, and this, and this, and this. Which looks fine if you have laid it out meticulously using tabs and spaces, so it's like a spreadsheet. Then you press Shift-Alt-F, and it goes, ha, 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 ha. Good luck remembering what went with what. And then you take one of them out, and then you encounter some really weird extrapolation behavior about how browser engines take timing, where you've got 4 properties and 2 delays, and work out which delay goes with which property. So instead, what we're going to do is you're going to use transition, and we're going to stack multiple shorthands. So we're going to say color. Put a transition on that, and height, a transition on that, and border width, a transition on that. And if you start with all, that's your fallback. That's your default. So we say animate everything over 0.5 seconds apart from these other things where we want to do something special. So we can now say, right, our details content has a border width of 0, but when it's open, it's got a border width of 2 pixels. It's got padding, and it's got padding, so we want to keep the side padding, but the top and bottom padding is going to collapse. And then transition, everything does it over a second, except the border width, step start, that means do it right away. Snap straight into that one. And then on the way back out, because you can have asymmetric transitions, they do one thing in one direction, they do the other thing in the other direction. You always put it's the destination class that has the attributes. On that one, we want step end. So when we open it, the border will snap in immediately and then animate. And when we close it, it'll finish animating, and then the border will disappear, and it'll snap out. We're going to put a border radius transition on the summary, and then this thing here, we're going to say the border radius on the summary element, animate it over 0.1 seconds, but wait. Wait a second before you do that. And the reason is, so if we just run it like that, we now get this fairly nice sort of smooth scrolling effect. But if we magnify it and slow it way down, just watch what happens to that bottom left corner of the summary there. See that? Ah. Isn't that beautiful? It's like closing the door on a Tesla before they turned into crap, you know? And this is the kind of thing that I love, is the ability to go right into these tiny little details and say, that could be better, that could be classier, that could be smoother, that thing there, that should wait a second, and then it should close up. Now, can you use this stuff? Yeah. That's where it gets complicated. No, you can't. Interpolate size is relatively recent and has not been deployed across Firefox or Safari yet. But one thing which is widespread across browsers is we have a rigorous mechanism now. If we do actually run this code in Firefox, what we get is a slightly weird effect, because it can animate the padding and the border, but it can't animate the height of the element. So we get this kind of this janky effect. And Safari is just like, I don't know. I'm over here. I'm eating paste and waiting to take over as the new Internet Explorer. But there is a new syntax. It's called the supports at rule that you can put in your CSS. You can say, look, if you know what this thing means, here is some extra CSS for you. If you, the browser, do not understand interpolate size allow keywords, this is not for you. But the lovely thing about that is we can deploy the code now, and at some point in 6 months or so, Safari will support interpolate size, and when they do, that will just start working for everyone on that version without us having to deploy updates to it. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about colors. When the web was young, if you wanted to make something on your web page a particular color, the best way to do it was to use the named colors. And there was a set of about 145 colors, like Dodger blue and fire brick and medium turquoise and lawn green. And some of them were a little odd. Like we had a black and we had a dim gray, we had gray and we had dark gray, which was a little bit lighter than gray, because why would that be a problem for software engineering? Where did these colors come from? CSS got them out of Netscape, where they already worked. Where did Netscape get them? Netscape got them from X Windows, X11. X11 got them from a bunch of developers sitting down over many years with the Sinclair Paints catalog and typing color names into a file called rgb.txt. And then somebody comes along in the late 80s and they go, yeah, you know what, Crayola. That is the definitive source of truth from the field of color science, which is where we get all these weird idiosyncratic names from. Now, there's only 2 color names that have been added to CSS since the days of Netscape. One of them is orange. The guy called Eric Meyer, and Eric based a lot of the tests for the CSS2 validation suite. He used the color orange in them because it worked, and he didn't realize it wasn't in the spec. And so when they published it, they're like, we better put orange in this because it's all over the tests for it, and it's not actually part of the specification. Now, the other one of these, there's quite a sad story behind it, because Eric Meyer's daughter, Rebecca, she died of brain cancer when she was 6 years old. And the CSS working group, they said, why don't we put her favorite color in the spec as a memorial? And they did. And that's where Rebecca Purple came from. And so CSS named colors, you know, they're human. They have heart. They have stories behind them, and they're like, oh, well, that's quite neat. Alice Blue was Alice Roosevelt's favorite color. I think that was before Netscape, but I don't really do history very much. And we've got our gray and our dark gray. But, you know, this is no good for engineering. It's nice for choosing crayons, and it's nice for memorials and telling stories. For software engineering, not so much. So we had the red, green, blue color model. How much red have you got? How much green have you got? How much blue have you got? Now, this is based on the way devices render color. It's also based on the way human beings see color, in theory. But it is not the way human beings think about color. You ever been shopping for, like, you're redecorating your flat, and you're shopping for paint, or you're looking for curtains, and your partner picks up something, and it's like, we need this purple cushion, we need this, but green. And you know what they mean. Because maybe it's a very rich purple, and you want a rich green. Maybe it's a pastel purple, you want a pastel green. It's much more intuitive to think about colors in terms of hue, saturation, and lightness, where hue is where is this on a color wheel, saturation is how rich is the color, and lightness is where is it on a scale from black to white. Now, CSS has got functions for deriving colors programmatically. There's the RGB function, how much red, how much green, how much blue. There is the hue, saturation, lightness function. There are alpha variants of this if you want colors which are transparent. And then they come along and go, no, sorry. We got it wrong. Same thing, but we're not going to use commas anymore. We're going to use spaces between the elements, which is the modern as opposed to the legacy syntax for CSS color functions. Now, the reason they did this is the legacy syntax can't break. So they needed a way of rolling out new features without breaking old ones. So if there's a comma in these functions, hey, kick in the legacy stuff, web's not going to break. If there isn't, then kick in the new color module. And the reason the new color module is awesome is that it supports something called relative colors. So we could say, hey, background color plum. There we go. What if it's plum, but we don't want it to be plum, we want it to be blue? So we can say background color, I want you to do an HSL, a hue, saturation, lightness calculation from plum. I want the hue to be 180 degrees, and the saturation and lightness, keep them the same as they were originally. Or maybe we want the same thing, but we don't want it to be 180 degrees hue. We want to turn the color wheel a little further, 100 degrees. That's going to give us a kind of green color. Now, you can combine this with some other modern CSS functions and features. We're going to have a root element here, and we're going to define a variable. CSS has variables now. CSS has a type system. CSS type system has colors and lengths and angles and percentages and ratios and all kinds of stuff that would not make sense in any other programming language, but in CSS they work brilliantly. So we're going to define a base color, which is plum, and then we're going to say, right, every paragraph on this page has a background color, which is the hue from the base color. I want you to calculate 20 times the sibling index of this paragraph. So the first paragraph sibling index is 1. Second one is 2, 3, 4, 5. So the paragraphs know how many little paragraphy brothers and sisters they've got, and they know where they sit in that pecking order. And so we can do a procedural function on that, and we get this rainbow spectrum effect. Now, if we do the same thing, but instead of plum, we're going to make our base color red, which is a full intensity color, Cool. CSS rainbow. Excellent. With one tiny problem. The algorithm says these colors are all the same lightness. Which one's more readable? Now, they both got the same L value, but the hello world is much more readable. The reason is that human eyes do not respond equally to different wavelengths of color. We see blue quite well, we see green incredibly well, and we see red pretty well. So the same amount of lightness, the same amount of energy entering your eye. If it's in the blue wavelength, it looks pretty dim, and so you don't get a lot of contrast between that and black. If it's in the sort of red, green, yellow end of the spectrum, it looks much, much lighter. And so there are a bunch of other color models. One of the oldest ones is lab color. It's one that's used in television broadcasting. You got lightness, and then you got two numbers. Where is this on the A spectrum, which goes from green to red, or the B spectrum goes from blue to yellow? There's hue, whiteness, and blackness. There's a thing called LCH, which is lightness, chrominance, and hue, but using a slightly different model. And then in 2020, a Swedish guy called Björn Ottosson, who's a man after my own heart. He describes himself as a developer, musician, and someone who solves problems. He sits down during COVID lockdowns, and he goes, you know, LCH is not okay. I'm going to create a better version, and he creates OK Lab and OK LCH. And as far as I can tell, they are called that because he thought they were OK. That's it. Now, OKLCH is fantastic because it uses the OKLab color space with polar coordinates for the chrominance and the hue, which means if we do the same thing as before, but now we're going to use the OKLCH color space, we get this very, very balanced mix of lightnesses across the spectrum. So we can pick a color. Now, the place where this kind of thing is really useful, you have something where you want your customers or your users to be able to choose colors, right? Because they got a storefront or a CMS, or they're styling their avatar, or they're picking the background color for their Windows desktop. Now, letting a user choose one color is okay. Letting a user choose two colors is a horrible mistake because users make terrible choices. So what you want to do is you want to let them pick the one color that's really special to them, and then procedurally generate a complementary palette. And there are various models. One of my favorites is something called a tetradic palette. So you pick the user's favorite color on the wheel, you take the color that is diametrically opposite, and then you take another pair which are offset by a certain distance from that. And you can tweak the distance. But this will tend to give you a set of 4 colors that work pretty well together. It's not bulletproof, it's not foolproof, but you can do some interesting stuff with it. Like, you can build web pages that have tetradic dynamically generated color schemes. Now, this page here, this is just a screen recording of a live web page, because all the stuff that's on here is CSS HTML with no JavaScript. So I'm going to talk you through. Now, you're probably looking at that. You're like, OK, well, we know how to change the color on a heading. That's not a big deal. And we know how to change the colors of the text and those kinds of things and these div elements. How are we doing the animation? And Mr. Floofy, the dog there, how is he changing color? So let's look at how it works. We're going to do a little standalone rabbit hole demonstration now. CSS animation. We've looked at transitions. Transitions are brilliant if you want to go from here to there and you don't care what happens along the way. Just take the shortest route possible. If you want to get from here to there, but you want to take a couple of detours, or you want to bounce, or you want to have something flash red and white and then go back to being gray again, you need to use keyframe animation. So we got a page here, has a heading 1, it's lime colored, it's at the top left, it's got an absolute position. Now I'm going to define a set of keyframes here called moving H1 demo. That name is anything I like. I can call that anything. And I'm going to say I want you to go from left 1 rem to left 20 rems. And then in my heading 1, I'm going to say animation name is this, duration 2 seconds, play it, and boom, there we go. Except when we're finished, it's going to snap back, because by default, as soon as the animation's finished, everything goes back to how it started. So we need to add another thing to it here, which is we need to add animation fill mode forwards. Says when you're finished, just leave everything where it ended up. This is fine. Now, animation, this is just from and to. We can do more sophisticated stuff. We're going to say, OK, well, at 0% of the way through this animation, it's there. At 20%, it's all the way over there. And then at 100%, kind of bring it back a fair way. So now when we run this one, we get that effect and fill forwards. And we can animate multiple things. We can say, all right, well, let's animate the left position and the background color and the border radius and the background color and the border radius. And why not? At the end, the background's going to go purple, so we're going to make the foreground color go white. And this gives us a very, very powerful model for animating multiple properties across a set of defined keyframes that we can then drop onto whatever elements we want and say, start here, do that, take this long, and when you're finished, stop, or snap back, or reverse it, play it backwards to get back where you started, or just keep looping the thing forever. Now, one of the things I really enjoy about working with CSS is once you start working through something like this, your brain is going, well, hang on, there's that other thing that we saw. Because we had variables, and we've seen that a variable can be an angle. And we've seen that you can use an angle to rotate something, but you can also use an angle to define a position on a color wheel. So maybe, what if we do an animation that changes a variable, and the variable's an angle, and then the angle becomes a color, and the angle becomes a position, and so we go, all right, let's have a body, and we're going to use a flex display here to put a thing in the middle, and then we'll define a keyframe set called spin and hue, which takes a variable called angle, and it's going to go from 0 degrees all the way around to 360 degrees. And then the root element, let's animate the root element. So basically, we're changing the value of a global variable. And then a heading 1, we're going to say, well, background color, let's do an OKLCH calculation based on that angle on the color wheel. And also, we'll do a transformation, so we'll spin it. Transformation, transition are different things. These will occasionally trip you up till you figure the logic or the semantics out. Transformation is geometry. It's move it, spin it, scale it, rotate it. So, hey, nothing happens. Almost. If you want to do this, if you want to do animation based on changing the value of a variable, you just need to give the browser a little bit of a heads up that there is this variable that's going to change, so anywhere it sees it, it should be constantly reevaluating the value of that expression. So we're going to drop in an @ property called angle. The syntax here, now, variables and properties in CSS, they added this late. And they added it late, which meant all the sensible syntax was already taken by something else, which is why variables in CSS look like comments in SQL, because minus minus on the beginning was kind of the only thing they had left that wasn't already being used by somebody. Syntax angle, the type system, they're like, well, we'll put the name of the type inside angle brackets, inside quotes as a string. The initial value is degrees, that's a literal. Inheritance is just, is this going to filter down onto nested elements and those kinds of things. But once we've defined that, now we have an element that, based on a single angle variable, is both going to spin, and it should spin infinitely, because there is a... It does spin infinitely if you don't stop the video recording. That's what it does. And so that's how the animation effect on this thing is achieved. There is an angle variable in there, and there's another one, the tetrad angle, the distance between them is also dynamic, and then all of the color palette and everything is being derived dynamically based on those properties. So there's 2 more questions that I'm hoping some of you are asking, because I'm about to answer them. One of them is, how did you actually build the color wheel? And the other one is, how are you tinting the dog? Because we know how to tint headlines, but dog tint color, that's not a thing that CSS has. So the color wheel, CSS has gradients. It's had gradients, background gradients, for a long time. And so if we have a linear gradient here that goes from tomato to gold to spring green to deep sky blue to plum back to tomato again, we get this kind of slightly pastel-y rainbow. That's a linear gradient. It goes in one direction. There's also a radial gradient, which starts in the middle and goes out. And there is also a thing called a conic gradient. And a conic gradient starts at 12 o'clock and it goes all the way around. And you can see where this is going. So if we take a div element and we say, well, we'll give it a border radius of 100%, which turns a rectangle into a circle, and we'll give it a border and a width and a height, and then the background image. Now, this is where we start weaving little details together. We want a conic gradient that is in the OKLCH color space and is going to increase the hue, is how it gets from one color to another. I want you to go from red, lightness, chrominance, and 0 degrees of hue at 0 degrees on the color wheel. At 180, on the wheel, we want 180 on the color, and at 360 on the wheel, we want 360 on the color. So we go from red round to blue and back round to red again, and that gives us that. It gives us that conic gradient effect. And then we can use a CSS pseudo element called after, and we say, once you've drawn one of those, draw this empty content after it with a border radius and a solid white background, and so that's going to give us the color wheel effect there. And so that's how we get that. And then we drop a couple of spans on the top, we round the corners, and we rotate them based on the value of the angle that is being dynamically calculated. Now, you can do a whole bunch of other stuff with CSS backgrounds. It's astonishing what you can use them to do. So we looked at this idea of a conic gradient as like a nice, smooth color wheel. But what if you have a conic gradient where we say, well, we're going to go gray from 0 to 90 degrees, and then we're going to have a hard transition from 90 to 180, and then we're going to go gray again, and then we're going to go silver again. And so we get quadrants. We get this pattern. But we can extend this. And we can say, well, what if we take a conic gradient pattern, but we give it a position and a size? We say, draw it at the top left and make it 32 pixels wide, 32 pixels high. And what that gives us is a checkerboard background. And if you want to, you can drop in a diagnostic rule which says find that background and apply it to any image whose source attribute ends with .png, so you can see which PNGs on your website are actually transparent and which ones just think they're transparent because they're a white background on a white page, which has saved my ass on more than one occasion. Or we could say, you know what, let's have a radial gradient that is going to be red from 0 to 8 pixels and then hard stop white the rest of the way, put it in the center and make it 32 pixels wide, and look at that. We got polka dots on the internet. Isn't that special? But we can combine them. The real power of CSS backgrounds and composition is we can say, all right, so this page, now this is a hack. If you want one of your layers to be a solid color, it can't be a color, but it can be a gradient that's only one color, which does the same thing. I can't make it work without this, and I can't find anyone who said this is a good idea, so I'm doing this until someone has a better way. But then we can say, well, in front of that, I want you to draw a repeating linear gradient. Now, 0, 0, 0, 0, that's transparent. That's black with all the opacity turned off, and then one little stripe of sky blue. But then we can draw another one in front of that, and we say same thing, but this time instead of going to the left, we want you to go to the top. And so we get grid patterns. We can get graph paper. You can get isometric grids. You can do all kinds of things by combining multiple backgrounds. And where it gets really interesting is you don't have to combine them just by drawing one on top of the other on top of the other. So we can take our document body. Our background image is Floofy, who I found on Splash. And we're going to say background size, auto, 100%, position, right center, no repeat, and boom, there he is. Hey, Floofy. And now we're going to say, all right, well, let's put another background on that. So in front of Floofy, we're going to draw a linear gradient white, so just a plain white background. But then the blend mode, we're going to set to saturation. And what that does is it says, draw the image, and then for every pixel in the image, take the saturation of the next layer and apply that to the image underneath it. And white has no saturation because it's white. It's not a color with a tint. And so this is going to take that image and it's going to make it grayscale by knocking all the saturation out of it. And then we can say, all right, good game, let's drop in another one. Let's put a linear gradient in front of it, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. You remember that one, right? And this time we're going to use a background blend mode of color. And so now we've got a rainbow tinted dog. Or instead of the rainbow gradient, we can say, no, linear gradient, OK, LCH from base color. So we do that color calculation we did in our spinning color palette demo, and that will allow us to apply a color tint to it. So even if you have something like a content management system where your users can upload a hero image, and previously you're like, OK, well, you give us the image, we're going to pull it into Photoshop, make it black and white, apply a tint, and then upload that. You can do all that in CSS now based on variables and colors. So whatever image they upload, you can knock out the saturation, tint it, use that as the background, and compose over the top of it. And if they change the color, all of those elements are going to update at the same time. So that's how we built that. That's how that thing works. Now, last thing that I want to talk about is the holy grail of CSS, which is styling select elements. Because when the web, I like that noise. That's people going, he sees my pain. The pain is not quite over yet, but we're closer than we've ever been. Now, the reason CSS elements are such a pain in the ass is they're complicated, select elements, sorry, drop-down lists. Such a pain in the ass, is early browsers didn't draw them. They just left a hole in the web page and they said to the operating system, hey, put one of your menu things in here. And they did. And in early versions of Internet Explorer, you couldn't draw anything in front of one of those because even if you had like absolute positioned elements with Z indexes, the browser would draw selects over the top of them. So you had to put an iframe in front of them and then put something, it was, yeah. And so we've never been able to style these. And it's the same thing. For a while, there was a proposal to introduce a new HTML element called a select menu, which would give you a stylable select. Now, new HTML elements, you have a chicken and an egg problem. Because if the element doesn't work in browsers, no one's going to use it on their websites. And if no one's using it on their websites, it's not going to be a priority for the browser vendors. And so it's never going to happen. And so wherever possible, the CSS working group and folks like OpenUI who are driving the specs for this thing, they try to come up with something that will degrade gracefully in browsers that don't support it yet, so that it gets out on the web, it gets in the wild, and Safari and Firefox and Chromium are like, we really need to support that because the others are supporting it and it's making us look bad. And so they rolled out a keyword called appearance base select. So you need to apply this to your select element, but you also need to apply it to a thing called the picker select. And people are like, well, why picker select? Why not just picker? And they said, you know the thing where we list all the things we want to fix if we had a time machine? We don't want to have to come back in 2 years when we realize that the color picker and the date picker and the file picker are also kinds of picker that we accidentally swept up when we were doing this. So you've got to target the select picker. But once you've applied that, what you get is the ability with CSS to target every single element. That is your select picker. That thing there is an option. That can be styled. That thing there is the check mark that belongs to the option. That little arrow in the corner there, that is the select picker icon. And all of these things can be styled using all the stuff that we talked about: transitions, animation, rotation, color palettes, all of that kind of stuff. And so you can build a drop-down list that the HTML is the same as it's been for the last 30 years, but you can have color coding. You see the arrow there is doing this little flip animation? It's rotating in 3D. So it's actually spinning around the Z-axis, moving in and out of the screen as it does that. It has keyboard support. You don't need to build your own JavaScript on key press handlers. The select list is, to me, it's a classic example of something that most developers can build their own, and it almost works, and it takes a couple of hours. Or maybe a couple of minutes if you vibe code it these days. But to actually maintain one of these, which has the accessibility and localization, all the other things that browsers give you for free, well, now you're looking at a couple of months to get it working in the first place, and then a day or two to update it every time a new browser ships. It's much better to enhance the thing that's built in than to try and build your own replacement for it. But also, did any of you see, 2 years ago at NDC, there's a guy called Brecht de Rooij who works with the OpenUI group, who's doing some fantastic stuff. And I caught up with him at an event in the Netherlands late last year. And he had a demo in his presentation that I went back to the hotel. I was like, I want to reverse engineer that. I want to know how he built that. So Brecht gets the credit for the idea for this one because I think it's fantastic. It's a radial select. And so this, there you go, click on that, and you get a little thing spin out. And you can choose your reaction based on a series of emoji for that. And this is, so the HTML code for this thing, that's the keyboard support. So tab, arrows up and down, you can still pick all the things with it. The HTML looks like that. That's the whole thing. JavaScript looks like that. That's the perfect amount of JavaScript for a custom component. And if you want to see the CSS, I've stuck this up on CodePen, and so there's a QR code and there's a link you can get on, and I'll stick the link on Blue Sky after this. Now, can you use it? Well, no. It works in Chrome, or it works in Chromium, which means it works in Chrome and Edge, and also works in all of the boutique browsers, like Vivaldi and Brave and Arc, and all the things out there which use the Chromium engine and wrap it up in their own kind of business model and all that kind of stuff. It's not there in Safari yet. It's not there in Firefox yet. So if you do it in those, all you're going to get is you're going to get a regular drop-down with some emoji in it. So it still works. Whether that's an acceptable degradation for you, your business, your customers, that is a decision that you are empowered to make. But the thing that I think is kind of, gives me hope, the reason I think this is important, the reason I enjoy learning about it, talking about it, is all of this innovation. It's not like the dark days when one browser vendor would go, ta-da, we did a thing. And everyone else would go, oh, crap, we were going to do a thing that was like that, but it's not that. And so you ended up with document.all versus document.layers, or you ended up with things that you wrote one bunch of code that worked in Safari and then a different bunch of code that worked in Firefox. The standards are being evolved in public. It is open. It is collaborative. They are being, people are not rushing to, they want to get stuff out so we can use it, but they also want to get it right, because no one wants to add any more things to the list of mistakes in CSS that we'd fix if we had a time machine. Now, in theory, this means that all of the standards that govern the web, there is even a standard for quirks mode. Somebody out there is retrospectively documenting all of the weirdness that the old browsers used to do, because a lot of that behavior is still supported. This means all the specifications are out there. They are public. They are rigorous. The browser engineering specs for this stuff goes into a level of detail that will make your head spin, which means if you wanted to write a new browser, all the stuff you need to know is on there. Now, nobody is going to write a new browser because that would, it would be absolutely prohibitively expensive, except for the CEO of Cursor, who went on the internet a couple of weeks ago and said, we built a browser in a week in Cursor. It ran uninterrupted for a week. It's 3 million lines of code, thousands of files. It's got a Rust HTML parsing engine, CSS, Cascade. It kind of works. It still has issues and is, of course, very far from WebKit Chromium parity, but we were astonished that simple websites render quickly and largely correctly. So this is one vision of the future, is that Cursor are knocking out vibe-coded browsers every week, and as long as the rest of us stick to writing simple websites, they will render quickly and largely correctly, and it kind of works. Or maybe the future is open collaborative specification. Now, this talk, we have talked about a tiny, tiny part of all the things which are, they've been there the whole time, and we didn't know about them because we'd never seen that bit of the spec. Or they've been there the whole time, and we tried them out once in 2015, and it didn't work, and we've never gone back because we didn't see the thing on Hacker News about how it works now. Or they are actively being developed. They are working group standards. They are prototypes. They are specifications. All of this stuff is being developed out there. And the thing that I love about it, the thing that I find most heartwarming about CSS, it's a presentation language. Absolutely everything that is in there because at some point, a human being is going to look at it, or is going to read it, or is going to interact with it. And so if you want to, as I do, if we want to build beautiful, responsive, elegant, interactive web experiences, things that real people are going to use, that they're going to go, oh, you know what? That was nice. And all they were doing was paying their gas bill, but they're like, I feel good because the thing I used to pay my gas bill worked nicely, and it had this lovely little animation that just made me feel a little bit happy. Then it is probably high time we all revisited CSS and took another look at it. Thank you. I'm just going to plug some stuff quickly, and then I'll take some questions. If you enjoyed the last hour and you want to learn more about it, I am running a bunch of workshops. So there was one yesterday. So if they invent that CSS time machine, you can travel back to Monday, and you can come and do my CSS workshop, which was here at NDC yesterday. I'm doing that again. I'm doing it on Zoom in March this year. So I'm actually running a couple. I got one, which is ASP.NET Core 10, advanced web applications, all kinds of stuff that you can do with ASP.NET, which is the best development framework in the world. I will fight you on this. If you like the talk, and you're like, how does he make talks like that? Well, I teach people to do that as well. So this is going to be, now all of these, the way they work, they are half-day sessions. They're in the afternoon UK time. So dylanbeattie.net/workshops has got all the info on those. We start at 2 o'clock. We run till about 5:30, 6 o'clock. If you're in the UK, that's your afternoon. If you're North America East Coast, that's your morning. If you're North America West Coast, I'm really sorry. I'll try to be interesting and keep everyone awake. And if you're further east, Turkey, those kinds of places, it's going to be a nice late night, but we'll try and keep things. It's live, it's online, it's on Zoom. Check that out. Early bird tickets are on sale now. I'd love to see some of you there. If those don't work, but you want to know what other stuff I'm doing, I have a mailing list, because social media sucks ass. It's just me. I write emails by hand. You can reply to them. I will tell you about conferences that I'm doing and workshops I'm running and dumb videos I put on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And things like the fact that we are taking over the Slaughtered Lamb on Friday night for Pubconf, and it's going to be a tremendous amount of fun, and it'd be lovely to see some of you there. Folks, thank you so much for your time.